Firefighters thought it was funny to spray a young girl with cold water in front of everyone. But moments later, her mother arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. What would you have done in her place? The morning sun poured a gentle gold over the quiet suburb, glinting off dewdrop lawns and rooftops that had seen a dozen seasons come and go without much change. On one of those streets, where everything seemed still and predictable, Ronda Rousey's house stood as a picture of quiet discipline. It wasn't fancy, but it was orderly white walls, clean driveway, a punching bag hanging on the porch like a symbol of who she once was and who she still refused to forget. Inside, Ronda was already awake, barefoot on the mat in her living room, her breath controlled and her movements precise. She was shadowboxing, not for fame, not for cameras, but to remind her body that it still knew the rhythm of power, the tempo of focus. Her fist cut the air silently, her eyes fixed on an invisible opponent. The house was filled with the soft thud of her feet and the steady hum of her breath. From the kitchen came the sound of a spoon clinking against a bowl. Her daughter Lily sat at the table in her oversized school sweatshirt, stirring her oatmeal absent-mindedly as she flipped through a sketchbook. At 14, she had her mother's determination, but not her confidence. Her sketches were full of open skies, lakes, and light, everything calm, everything pure. On the fridge behind her, there were reminders and magnets. A photo of Lily on stage during a school play. A worn fight poster showing Ronda in her prime. Fists raised, face fierce and young. They were side by side, the fighter and the dreamer-like past and present, staring back at each other through magnets and memory. "Morning, champ," Ronda said, stepping into the kitchen with a towel over her shoulder. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, the kind that told of a morning already spent in focus. Lily smiled faintly, pushing her sketchbook closed. "You're the champ, Mom," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to survive 8th grade." Ronda smirked, grabbing a coffee mug. "Survival's the first step to greatness?" The kitchen filled with the warm smell of coffee and oatmeal. Outside, the neighborhood started to wake up, distant dogs barking, a delivery truck passing, sprinklers ticking rhythmically across lawns. The radio played something soft and forgettable, the kind of song that filled silence without interrupting it. Ronda leaned against the counter, watching her daughter. She loved these moments, the stillness before the day began, before the world demanded too much. On the counter lay a folded flyer with bold red letters, Fire Safety Day at Lincoln Middle School. See our local heroes in action. It was the city's annual event where firefighters gave safety demonstrations to students. Ronda had promised to stop by after her morning training session, maybe talk to some of the instructors she knew. She had always respected the fire service, their discipline, their bravery, but she also knew how easily power could turn into arrogance when no one kept it in check. Lily adjusted her backpack and tucked her sketchbook inside. "They're doing a water demonstration today," she said. "They said it's going to be fun." Ronda smiled, though something in her stomach turned not out of worry, but that mother's instinct that always twitched before big days. "Don't stand too close to the front," she said half-jokingly. Lily rolled her eyes playfully. "I'm not 5, Mom." When the girl left, Ronda stood at the window watching her walk down the street, the morning sun catching the blonde highlights in her hair. The world outside looked harmless, too harmless. Ronda took another sip of her coffee and tried to shake the unease. It wasn't fear exactly, but that fighter's sixth sense, the one that whispered when a calm was too quiet, when peace was just waiting to be broken. At the gym, the day unfolded as usual. The heavy scent of leather and sweat filled the air, familiar and grounding. Ronda moved between the punching bags and the young students' kids barely into their teens, full of energy but lacking control. She corrected their stances, guided their breathing, and reminded them that strength without respect was just chaos. "Discipline," she repeated, "isn't about power. It's about knowing when not to use it." Between lessons, she chatted briefly with the gym manager, who was fretting over a late equipment shipment. He asked her to stay a bit longer, just until the delivery arrived. She hesitated but agreed. A few extra minutes couldn't hurt, she thought. It wasn't far to Lily's school anyway. As she waited, she glanced at the clock and checked her phone messages from parents thanking her for the way she trained their kids, keeping them confident but humble. That kind of respect mattered more to her now than any belt or trophy ever had. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Middle School, preparations for Fire Safety Day were in full swing. The courtyard buzzed with excitement. The red fire truck gleamed under the sun, hoses neatly coiled, the city emblem shining on the side. Teachers directed students into orderly rows, while a few firefighters joked loudly among themselves near the equipment. Most of them were professional, calm, but two younger men, Jack and Ray, stood out immediately. They were muscular, loud, with that reckless kind of energy that wanted to be noticed. Jack threw his helmet up and caught it one-handed, grinning like a performer before a show. Ray was filming him on his phone, muttering jokes under his breath. "Come on, give him a little Hollywood," he said, laughing. They were supposed to demonstrate hose control later, but already they were showing off. A nearby teacher frowned at their antics, reminding them to keep it educational, but Jack just waved him off. "Relax, it's for the kids," he said. His voice was the kind that carried cocky, too sure of itself. From across the courtyard, Lily arrived with her classmates. She stood near the back of the group, shy but curious. She loved seeing the trucks, the tools, the precision of it all. In her eyes, firefighters were the real heroes, people who fought danger, not other people. She didn't notice the glances the two men exchanged when they spotted the group of students. Jack nudged Ray. "Watch this later. Let's make it a little more lively this time." "Careful," Ray said, smirking, "or the boss will have your hide." Jack grinned wider. "He's not even here yet." The air was full of that noisy, playful energy of a public event, children laughing, teachers shouting instructions, the faint smell of engine oil and hot rubber mixing with spring air. But underneath it all, something felt slightly off, like a string pulled too tight before it snaps. By late morning, Rhonda finally left the gym, wiping sweat from her forehead as she got into her truck. The sun was high, the road shimmered with heat. She turned onto the familiar route toward the school, music low, mind half on training schedules, half on her daughter's smile that morning. She imagined Lily watching the demonstration, maybe sketching one of the shiny red trucks, safe and happy among her classmates. But even as she drove, that feeling returned, the one that came before every fight, every ambush, every moment when the world suddenly changed its rules. The light ahead turned green, but her foot lingered on the brake for half a second too long. Something, somewhere, told her to hurry. At the school, the courtyard gleamed under the midday sun. Parents gathered along the fence, phones ready to film. The firefighters were preparing for the main part of the show, the hose demonstration. Jack and Ray were in charge, and they strutted around with exaggerated swagger. A few other firefighters exchanged uneasy looks, but no one stopped them. The chief had stepped away to take a call. Authority was absent, and mischief had found its perfect window. Lily was near the middle of the group, next to two younger students who laughed nervously as Jack pointed the large nozzle toward the training cones. The hose flexed under the water pressure, spraying a mist that shimmered like diamonds in the sunlight. The crowd clapped and cheered when the jet of water knocked over a distant target. Jack looked back at the kids and grinned. "Who wants to see how strong this thing really is?" he shouted. The children squealed in delight, thinking it was part of the act. Lily's laughter mixed with theirs, her sketchbook still clutched under one arm. She had no idea that this playful moment was about to twist into something cruel. As Rhonda's truck turned onto the final stretch toward the school, the wind shifted, carrying faint sounds of cheering and water splashing. She smiled for a moment, unaware that just ahead, two careless men were about to cross a line they'd never be able to take back. And as she pulled up to the gates, the sunlight flashed off the fire truck's mirrors, bright, blinding, almost prophetic. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The hose twisted in Jack's hands. Ray's laughter rose above the crowd. And somewhere deep inside Rhonda's chest, that quiet instinct hardened into certainty. Something was about to go wrong. Then as the laughter of children filled the courtyard, the first wild stream of water tore through the air. The sound hit first, a violent, tearing hiss, like an animal breaking free of its leash, followed by the sharp, wet slap of water meeting skin and asphalt. Lily barely had time to raise her hands before the full force of the jet struck her square in the chest. The impact knocked her backward, spinning her slightly as the crowd gasped and shrieked. For an instant, it was confusion. People laughed, thinking it was part of the show. But the laughter faltered as Lily crumpled under the torrent, the sketchbook slipping from her arm and scattering its pages in a flurry of wet, ruined paper. Jack's laughter filled the courtyard, echoing against the brick walls. "Looks like someone can't handle a little water," he shouted, his words slicing through the stunned silence that followed. Ray, holding his phone up, kept recording, zooming in on the girl struggling to shield her face as cold water slammed into her from only a few yards away. The force was brutal, too powerful for any human demonstration, and it pinned Lily to the ground. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through in seconds, her breath lost somewhere beneath the assault. The teachers shouted for them to stop. One of them, an older man, tried to run forward but slipped on the slick pavement. The crowd began to stir in panic, the noise rising like a tide. Still, Jack grinned, bracing the hose with both arms, his body angled forward with the thrill of dominance, the sick adrenaline of a man who mistook cruelty for entertainment. "Come on, it's just water," he yelled as if that excused it, as if pain didn't count when it was delivered by something pure. Somewhere behind the crowd, Rhonda's truck screeched to a halt. She was out of the car before the engine even stopped, the door left hanging open. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding in her ears. For a brief second, she thought it was just noise. Kids playing, water spraying. But as she rounded the corner, she saw the truth. Her daughter was on the ground, arms raised in defense, water hammering down on her small frame, and the two men behind the hose laughing as if they had done something heroic. Rhonda's mind went blank. Every instinct she had ever honed in a ring, every lesson about timing and restraint, vanished. There was only movement. Her legs carried her forward through the chaos, past the shouting parents, the shocked teachers, the children who were now crying instead of cheering. The sunlight glinted off the cascade of water, turning the moment into a nightmare of brilliance and cruelty. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice slicing through the air. It wasn't a plea, it was a command, heavy and absolute. For a moment, the two firefighters hesitated. Ray stopped filming, lowering his phone slightly. Jack's grin faltered as Rhonda stormed closer, water splashing against her jeans as she stepped through the spray. Her eyes burned, not just from anger, but from disbelief. Her daughter, her little girl, was shivering on the ground, trying to breathe through the shock of cold and humiliation. Jack finally twisted the valve, and the roar of water fell away, leaving a sudden, hollow silence. The hose sagged, lifeless, water dripping onto the pavement in thin silver trails. The crowd stood frozen, caught between horror and fascination. No one dared move. Only the sound of Lily's uneven breathing broke the stillness. Rhonda dropped to her knees beside her, lifting her daughter's head gently, brushing the wet strands of hair away from her face. The girl's skin was pale, her lips trembling, her eyes half open, dazed. She whispered something. Rhonda couldn't hear the words over the rush of her own heartbeat. She pulled her daughter close, wrapping her in her jacket, shielding her from the eyes that watched too eagerly. When she looked up again, her face had changed. There was no panic left. Just that cold, terrifying calm of a fighter who has crossed a line of patience. Her gaze found Jack and Ray standing a few feet away. They looked suddenly smaller, uncertain. Jack tried to smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, it was just a demonstration," he started, voice wavering. She stepped too close. Rhonda stood slowly, her wet hair sticking to her shoulders, her clothes heavy with water. Her eyes didn't blink. "Say that again," she said softly, and something in her tone made the crowd step back without realizing it. Even Jack couldn't meet her stare for long. He looked down at the hose, at his boots, at anything but her face. The chief finally returned, confusion spreading across his features as he pushed through the onlookers. "What the hell is going on here?" he barked. But the scene explained itself. The soaked teenager trembling in her mother's arms, the idle hose snaking across the pavement, the uncomfortable silence of a crowd that had just witnessed something indefensible. Rhonda didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice was quiet, precise. Your men attacked my daughter, she said, with your equipment, on school property. The chief stammered, eyes darting to Jack and Ray, who now looked less like heroes and more like guilty children. It must have been an accident, he said, his tone already defensive. These things happen in training demos, pressure builds. Valves slip. Is that what you call it? Rhonda interrupted, stepping closer. An accident? I saw their faces. They were laughing. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. Someone was filming again. Another phone. Another lens. Truth, in this moment, was already escaping into the world, beyond anyone's control. The chief tried to speak again, but Rhonda turned away. She had no more patience for apologies disguised as excuses. She knelt beside Lily once more, lifting her gently. It's okay, baby, she whispered. We're going home. Lily clung to her weakly, her small hands gripping the fabric of her mother's jacket, as though it was the only solid thing left in the world. As they walked through the parted crowd, water still dripping from their clothes, Rhonda heard the whispers behind her. Some were sympathetic, others were cruel. People always needed to explain away what made them uncomfortable. She overreacted, someone murmured. Kids get wet all the time. She's Ronda Rousey, you know, probably just looking for attention. The words didn't reach her. They only circled like insects around the edges of her fury. When she reached the truck, she wrapped Lily in a blanket she kept in the back seat and helped her inside. The girl's teeth were chattering, her eyes unfocused. Mom, she whispered hoarsely. Why were they laughing? Rhonda froze for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. She had faced opponents who taunted her, men who had underestimated her, a world that had tried to reduce her victories to spectacle. But this was different. This was her child. There was no opponent to fight in a cage, no referee to step in. There was only a system that allowed cruelty to hide behind uniforms and procedure. She didn't answer. Instead, she started the engine, her jaw set, eyes hard on the road. Behind them, the sound of murmuring voices faded. The red fire truck gleamed in the sun like something false, something hollow. At the hospital, the doctors spoke in careful tones. Mild concussion, cold exposure, emotional shock. She'll be fine, they said, but their words couldn't touch the heaviness in Rhonda's chest. She thanked them out of habit, but her mind was already somewhere else, replaying every second of what she had seen, every smirk, every laugh, every excuse. Later, when the hospital was quiet and Lily slept beneath clean white sheets, Rhonda sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but her heart beat with that old familiar rhythm, the one that used to start just before a fight. She thought of Jack's face, the way he held the hose like a weapon, and of Ray grinning behind his phone. The injustice of it burned inside her like fire under ice. She wasn't just angry, she was awake. The kind of awake that didn't go away until something was set right. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the window pane. A softer kind of water, clean, harmless. Rhonda's gaze didn't move. Somewhere deep inside, a decision was forming, cold and deliberate. She didn't know yet how far this would go, but one thing was certain. The next time she stood in front of those men, there wouldn't be any laughter. The night stretched on, quiet and heavy, and when morning came, it would not bring peace. It would bring reckoning. Morning came gray and hollow, the kind of light that made everything look cold and washed out. The rain from the night before had stopped, leaving the streets slick and quiet. Rhonda sat at the edge of Lily's hospital bed, a paper cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. The steady beeping of the monitor and the soft rhythm of her daughter's breathing were the only sounds in the room. Lily was sleeping now, a little color back in her face, but the faint bruise across her temple told a story that Rhonda couldn't forget. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead, the movement tender but filled with tension. Her hands, once weapons that had brought her victory and applause, now trembled with helplessness. She had fought champions, taken hits that would have broken most people, but nothing in her life had ever struck her as hard as seeing her child on the ground, broken by arrogance and cruelty disguised as a joke. When the doctor came in with his clipboard, Rhonda barely looked up. "She's stable," he said softly, in that neutral tone meant to calm. "No signs of internal injury. Just rest, fluids, and time. He gave her a sympathetic smile before leaving. Rhonda nodded automatically, but the words rolled off her like rain off armor. Time couldn't fix what had happened. A few hours later, the hospital released them. The drive home was silent. Lily sat in the passenger seat wrapped in a blanket, her gaze distant, lost somewhere beyond the window. The world outside seemed to have moved on effortlessly, as if nothing had happened. The mail trucks rolled, the morning joggers passed, kids walked to school laughing. But inside the car, the air was thick, heavy with the kind of silence that follows trauma. When they got home, Rhonda helped Lily inside, sat her on the couch, and turned on the heater. "You rest," she said softly. Lily nodded, but there was no spark in her eyes, no familiar lightness in her voice. It was as though something fragile had been taken from her and replaced with a quiet shame she didn't deserve. The phone began to ring not long after. First the school principal, then a city official, and finally the chief of the fire department himself. Each conversation was the same, polite, careful, rehearsed. "We're very sorry about what happened," they said. "It was an unfortunate accident. The men didn't mean any harm." Rhonda listened, her jaw tightening with every word. "An accident," she repeated once, softly, almost to herself. "You call what I saw an accident?" But they never answered directly. Instead, they offered phrases like ongoing review and disciplinary consideration, all designed to sound responsible while meaning nothing at all. That afternoon, Rhonda drove to the fire department headquarters. The building was as sterile and self-satisfied as the people who worked inside its glass walls. Motivational posters, plaques of commendation. She waited in the lobby until the chief was ready to see her. He greeted her with a professional smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Rousey," he said, gesturing toward a chair, "I'm very sorry about the incident. Believe me, we're taking it seriously." Rhonda sat down, her posture straight, every inch of her radiating calm control. "Taking it seriously would mean accountability," she said, "not excuses." "Honor 'em." The chief cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Look, these are good men. They made a mistake. They got carried away during a demonstration. It wasn't malicious." Rhonda's eyes didn't move. "One of them filmed it while laughing. The other nearly knocked my daughter unconscious. That's not a mistake. That's humiliation." His expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Rousey, I understand your anger, but we can't make decisions based on emotion. We have procedures." "Procedures?" Her voice cut through his sentence like glass. "Your procedures let a man aim a high-pressure hose at a child for fun. Your procedures let another one record it for entertainment." The chief's polite facade cracked for just a second. "With all due respect," he said carefully, "your background might make you more confrontational than most parents. We're trying to resolve this without unnecessary escalation." There it was, the subtle warning, the veiled threat wrapped in civility. Rhonda stood, her shadow falling across his desk. "You're not resolving anything," she said quietly. "You're bearing it." She turned and walked out before he could answer. Outside, the sky was clearing. Sunlight broke through the gray clouds, sharp and indifferent. Rhonda stood beside her car for a long time, breathing in the cool air. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something colder resolve. When she got home, the internet had already turned the event into a sideshow. The video had been posted on social media that morning. It showed everything: the laughter, the force of the hose, the moment Lily fell. It was recorded from multiple angles, edited together by someone who thought they were being clever. The captions were worse. "Ronda Rousey's kid gets a taste of real life. Guess toughness doesn't run in the family." The comments section was a battlefield of cruelty and ignorance. Strangers debated her parenting, mocked her fame, and accused her of seeking attention. And through it all, the video kept spreading. Rhonda clicked it once, only long enough to see her daughter fall, and then she shut the laptop with a trembling hand. That night, Lily refused to come out of her room. Rhonda stood outside the door, hearing the faint sound of tears muffled by a pillow. She wanted to go in, to hold her, to promise her that it would all go away, but she couldn't lie. The world didn't forget. It only watched. She went to the living room instead and sat in the dark, staring at her own reflection in the window. The face staring back at her was calm but worn, older than she remembered. For the first time in years, she saw the fighter, not the mother, the person who didn't walk away when injustice stood in front of her. She went to the garage, flipped on the light, and walked to the old punching bag that hung in the corner. Dust floated in the air like quiet snow. She wrapped her hands in the worn tape she hadn't touched in months, each pull tighter than the last. Then she hit the bag once, twice again, each strike sharper, cleaner, more deliberate. The sound echoed in the small space, rhythmic and controlled. She wasn't raging blindly. She was remembering. Every lesson she had ever learned came back to her in those moments. Pain was temporary. Discipline was permanent. Anger without focus was useless. But anger with purpose could change the world. When she finally stopped, sweat ran down her arms, her breathing steady but heavy. She leaned her forehead against the bag, her eyes closed. In the silence, she saw her daughter's face again, that look of confusion and betrayal as the water struck her. She would not let that be the last time Lily felt powerless. By midnight, Rhonda sat at the kitchen table with her phone in hand, scrolling through names reporters, lawyers, local officials. Each number represented a door, a potential ally or obstacle. But she didn't call anyone yet. Not tonight. She wasn't ready to talk. She was planning. Upstairs, Lily's bedroom light went out. The house fell into silence. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly against the damp pavement. Rhonda looked toward the window again, her reflection now steady and sharp. She whispered under her breath, not as a promise, but as a fact. They think this is over. It's just begun. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly, the sound rising and falling like a warning carried on the wind. Rhonda closed her eyes and listened. The fighter in her was awake again, and this time, she wasn't stepping into a cage. She was stepping into something far more dangerous, a world where power hid behind badges and bureaucracy. And she was ready to face it head on. The rain started again, light and unthreatening, tapping softly against the window as if the world itself wanted to wash away the stain of the day. But Rhonda knew better. Some things couldn't be washed clean. Some wrongs had to be broken apart, piece by piece, until the truth stood bare. And that was exactly what she was going to do. The morning air carried the faint hum of distant traffic, but the Rousey house was silent. Rhonda sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee untouched in front of her, her phone beside it. The news had already moved on to something else, but online the video still lived, feeding the cruel hunger of strangers. Her inbox was full, some messages of support, others dripping with mockery or threats. She didn't read them anymore. The time for words had passed. She had spent days waiting for someone, anyone, to take responsibility, to show an ounce of decency. Instead, all she received were hollow apologies and bureaucratic phrases wrapped in politeness. The fire department had issued a statement calling the incident a miscommunication during an educational event. Miscommunication. That word echoed in her mind like an insult. Lily was home now, slowly recovering, but she moved through the house like a shadow of herself. She kept her sketchbook closed and avoided the mirrors. Sometimes Rhonda caught her daughter glancing toward the window, as though expecting to see someone laughing outside. The spark that had once filled the girl's eyes had dimmed, replaced by a quiet that frightened Rhonda more than any injury. She wanted to promise her that things would get better, but every time she opened her mouth, the truth stopped her. Things didn't just get better. People made them better, or they stayed broken. By noon, Rhonda was behind the wheel of her truck, her jaw tight, her hair tied back in a sharp knot. She was done waiting. The fire department headquarters loomed ahead, a gray building with polished windows that reflected nothing but sky. She parked, got out, and walked toward the doors with a stride that made people move out of her way without knowing why. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and disinfectant, too clean for what it represented. A receptionist looked up nervously as Rhonda approached. "I'm here to speak with Chief Daniels," she said, her voice calm but final. The woman stammered slightly. "He's in a meeting, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" Rhonda met her eyes. "I'll wait." And she did. For nearly 40 minutes, she sat in the sterile lobby, staring at the framed photographs on the wall, rows of men in uniform, smiling for the camera. Plaques that praise courage and service. Words that once meant something to her now felt hollow. When the door finally opened and Chief Daniels appeared, his surprise at seeing her was quickly masked by a professional smile. "Ms. Rousey," he said smoothly, "I wasn't expecting you. Please come in." His office was tidy, every object perfectly placed. Behind him, an American flag hung neatly, and on the desk sat a crystal award engraved with the words, "Community Leadership." It gleamed under the fluorescent light like a lie polished to perfection. "Thank you for seeing me," Ronda said, taking a seat. He nodded, folding his hands. "I imagine this is about the incident. I assure you we've handled it internally. Both men have received disciplinary notes and—" "Notes?" she interrupted, her voice low but cutting. "My daughter was knocked to the ground and humiliated in front of her classmates, and they get notes?" The chief sighed, adopting the patient tone of a man explaining reason to emotion. "We investigated, Ms. Rousey. There was no evidence of intentional harm. It was a lapse in judgment, not malice." "They laughed," she said. "They filmed it." "That's unfortunate," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "But in situations like these, emotions can distort perception. You've been under a lot of stress, I'm sure." Rhonda's jaw tightened. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't talk down to me. You weren't there." He hesitated, then forced a smile. "We're doing everything within our power to ensure nothing like this happens again. I'd advise letting it go before it turns into an unnecessary spectacle. It's not good for your daughter or your reputation." There it was, laid bare beneath the polished words. The warning, the unspoken reminder of how easily the world could twist a story against her. Rhonda stood slowly, her eyes locked on his. "My reputation," she said, "is the least of your problems." She turned and walked out before he could answer. In the hallway, the two men she least wanted to see were waiting. Jack leaned against the wall smirking, while Ray scrolled through his phone. They had the same arrogant posture as before, as if the entire situation had been a mild inconvenience. When they saw her, Jack straightened and gave a mock salute. "Well, if it isn't the famous Ronda Rousey," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you come to teach us another lesson in public relations?" Ray chuckled without looking up. "Maybe she wants to sign our autographs. We did make her kid famous." Rhonda stopped, every muscle in her body tightening, but her face remained unreadable. The old part of her, the fighter, the woman who thrived on precision and control, was awake now. She could feel it, steady and cold. Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, you should thank us. Your name's back in the news. Guess people missed you." For a long moment, Rhonda said nothing. Then she smiled, a small, chilling curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You should be very careful about what you wish for," she said quietly. He blinked, taken aback by the calm in her tone. She walked past them without another word. Her silence spoke louder than any threat. Outside, the sky had turned overcast again, the wind cool against her face. She walked back to her truck, her steps measured, every movement deliberate. She sat behind the wheel for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the building in front of her. Through the windshield, she could see the faint reflection of her own face, controlled, calm but no longer uncertain. She started the engine and drove without music, the hum of the road beneath her filling the silence. She didn't go home right away. Instead, she drove past the school, now empty, the courtyard washed clean by recent rain. For a moment, she imagined Lily there again, standing among her classmates, smiling. The image hurt, but it also reminded her what she was fighting for. By the time she returned home, dusk had settled. Lily was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the television playing quietly in the background. Rhonda watched her for a moment, the anger in her chest softening into something deeper resolve. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening street. Across the road, a neighbor watered his lawn, the thin arc of water glinting in the fading light. The sound made her flinch involuntarily. She forced herself to watch until the feeling passed. The world outside looked peaceful again, ordinary, but she knew better now. Underneath the calm, rot was growing complacency, arrogance, cruelty left unchallenged. The next step wouldn't be words or meetings or polite requests. It would be action, visible and undeniable. That night, as she lay awake in bed, she replayed every second of her day, every smirk, every empty apology. She thought of her daughter's trembling hands, the laughter that still echoed in her ears, and the silence that followed it. Justice, she realized, wasn't going to come from their offices or their procedures. It would have to come from her. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and slow, as if the sky itself was preparing for something inevitable. Rhonda closed her eyes and exhaled, her mind clear. The next time she saw Jack and Ray wouldn't be in a hallway filled with their laughter. It would be under lights in front of everyone, where truth could no longer hide behind uniforms or badges. And when that moment came, she would remind them, not with words but with discipline, precision, and control, what real power looked like. The following Saturday dawned clear and bright, the kind of morning that felt almost too calm to trust. The sky stretched open and flawless above the small city, sunlight pouring down as if determined to bleach out every trace of darkness. For the first time in a week, Rhonda felt an unfamiliar steadiness, an anchored certainty in her chest. It wasn't peace, it was purpose. She had learned long ago that true calm didn't come from comfort. It came from clarity, from knowing exactly what had to be done and refusing to look away. The day had been announced across the city as the fire department open house. The department's social media page advertised family activities, demonstrations, and a community lunch. They wanted to turn the page, to bury what had happened at the school beneath smiling photographs and empty words about public trust. It was the perfect stage, Rhonda thought. The perfect place for the truth to surface where everyone could see it. She dressed simply black jeans, a dark gray shirt, her hair tied back tightly. There was nothing theatrical in her preparation. She wasn't going to make a scene for its own sake. She was going to correct one. Before leaving, she stood for a long moment in the doorway of Lily's room. Her daughter was sitting cross-legged on her bed, sketchbook open in her lap. The page showed the outline of a firefighter's hose, but instead of water, light poured from it, sharp, golden, and endless. Rhonda felt a pang deep in her chest. "You're going out there, aren't you?" Lily asked quietly without looking up. "Yes," Rhonda answered. Lily nodded once, closing the book. "They'll be filming again," she said softly. "So let them." Rhonda smiled faintly, kissed her daughter's forehead, and left without another word. By noon, the fire department grounds were buzzing with people. Families wandered between trucks and tables. Children in plastic helmets tugged at their parents' sleeves. A local reporter from the community channel was interviewing visitors about the heroic spirit of local firefighters. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so bitter. Rhonda parked at the edge of the crowd and stepped out. Conversations faltered as people recognized her. Some faces lit with curiosity, others with unease. A few phones were raised almost immediately. She had expected that. Jack and Ray were both there, of course. They stood near one of the demonstration areas, wearing pressed uniforms and easy smiles, the picture of rehabilitated professionalism. They laughed loudly with a group of onlookers, spinning a watered-down version of the incident for anyone willing to listen. How a little mistake had blown out of proportion, how social media overreacted. Their tone was smug, the kind of arrogance that thrives when consequences never come. When Jack finally noticed her, the grin froze on his face. For a split second, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then he recovered, lifting his chin in exaggerated confidence. "Well, look who came back," he said, loud enough for the crowd around him to hear. "You here to give us another PR lecture, champ?" The word champ dripped from his mouth like poison disguised as flattery. Rhonda's voice was calm. "I came for an apology." Ray laughed. "We already gave one. Publicly. You just didn't like the wording." She took a step closer, and the shift in the air was immediate. Conversations around them softened. Phones lifted higher. The crowd could sense something brewing, something different from the usual weekend spectacle. "Say it," she said quietly to Jack. "Say you're sorry. Right here. To her. To every kid who saw what you did." Jack's smirk returned, but it was thinner now, more defensive. "You think you can come here and lecture us in front of everyone? You think that makes you a hero again?" He stepped forward until he was almost chest to chest with her, his breath sour with arrogance. "This isn't your cage, Rousey. You don't run this place." Rhonda's tone didn't change. "No," she said, "but I can still teach discipline." He moved first. Maybe he thought she'd flinch. Maybe he just wanted to show off. His hand reached toward her shoulder, a gesture meant to push, to provoke. It never landed. In a motion so fast it was almost invisible, Ronda caught his wrist, turned her hips, and sent him sprawling across the asphalt. The sound of his body hitting the ground was sharp and final. The crowd gasped as the movement unfolded too perfectly to mistake for luck. Jack groaned, trying to rise, but she was already standing over him, her stance balanced, her control absolute. Ray cursed and lunged forward, grabbing for her arm, but Ronda pivoted, using his momentum against him. Her foot hooked his leg, sweeping him off balance, and in the next instant, he was face down, her knee pressed lightly against his back. She didn't hurt him. She didn't need to. Every motion was clean, deliberate, precise. It was not a brawl. It was a demonstration of control, the kind these men had never learned. The scene froze. Cameras clicked. The crowd erupted, not in fear, but in astonished silence that slowly turned into applause. A few people shouted her name. Others just stared, their phones raised, capturing the moment when arrogance finally met accountability. Ronda looked down at the two men, both struggling more from humiliation than pain. "You wanted a show," she said quietly. "Now you've got one." She straightened and looked at the people gathered around. Her voice carried clearly. "Strength doesn't give you the right to humiliate. Power without respect is just abuse. These uniforms," she gestured toward the fallen men, "mean nothing without integrity behind them." The words weren't loud, but they rang with unmistakable force. Even the chief, who had come rushing from his office when the commotion began, stood speechless for a moment, his face flushed red, torn between outrage and fear of what the cameras had already caught. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled slightly. "That's enough, Ms. Rousey. This isn't the time or the place." "It's exactly the time and place," she replied evenly. "You built this event to celebrate responsibility. I just showed you what it actually looks like." Then she turned and began to walk away. No triumph, no theatrics, just quiet purpose. The crowd parted for her instinctively, like a tide yielding to the pull of gravity. Behind her, Jack and Ray struggled to their feet, faces flushed, their arrogance stripped bare under the glare of a dozen phone cameras. By the time Ronda reached her truck, the noise of the crowd had changed. There were cheers, now hesitant at first, then stronger. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. What had happened was no longer just her story. It belonged to every person who had ever been told to stay quiet, to let it go, to forgive what should never have happened. When she pulled out of the parking lot, her hands were steady on the wheel. Her pulse was calm, her breathing even. She wasn't proud. This wasn't pride. It was release. The moment she had carried like a stone inside her chest was finally gone, broken apart and left in the open for everyone to see. At a red light, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Behind her, the fire station stood framed against the sunlight, and in the distance, she could still hear the faint echo of applause carried on the wind. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind earned when truth finally stops hiding. She didn't know yet what would happen next, but she knew this much. The story was no longer theirs to bury, and no matter how they tried to rewrite it, the world had seen, the world had watched, and somewhere behind all the noise, justice had finally found its voice. The video spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, it was on every major platform. Clips replayed endlessly. Commentaries dissecting every movement, every word, every frame of Ronda's quiet reckoning. Some called it justice served, others a public humiliation. But the truth lay somewhere deeper in the raw silence of the moment after her final words. The image of the two firefighters sprawled on the asphalt beneath her calm gaze became the city's new mirror, a reflection of arrogance meeting accountability. By evening, the footage had reached national outlets, and by the next morning, the story had a name: the stream of justice. Ronda hadn't planned on any of that. When she woke the following day, the house was filled with messages and calls from journalists, advocacy groups, even former colleagues. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but she ignored most of it. She wasn't interested in interviews or validation. She hadn't done it for spectacle. She had done it because no one else would. Lily was still sleeping when Ronda stood at the window with a cup of tea. the early light touching the quiet street outside. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe without that crushing weight pressing against her chest. Yet peace didn't feel soft. It felt earned, like the calm after a long, bruising fight. By noon, the fire department had released an official statement. It was measured, polished, and far too late. They promised an internal review, pending disciplinary action, and an ethics seminar for all personnel. The mayor's office announced an independent inquiry into the department's conduct, and the city council demanded transparency in the investigation. The tone had shifted entirely. Now, those who had dismissed her as emotional were scrambling to prove they had always cared about justice. The same officials who had told her to let it go were now quoting her words in their speeches. Rhonda didn't feel vindicated. She felt exhausted. The knock on the door that afternoon was soft but insistent. When she opened it, Chief Daniels stood there, his expression stripped of the polished arrogance he'd worn before. Behind him, a city representative waited, clipboard in hand. The chief's voice was quiet when he spoke. "Ms. Rousey," he said, "I came to apologize. Personally." The words were careful, but his eyes betrayed something genuine fear. Yes, but also remorse. He handed her a formal letter of apology from the department, along with notice that Jack and Ray had been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. The chief paused before leaving. "They were wrong," he said simply, "and so were we." Rhonda didn't answer. She only nodded and closed the door. Her hands were steady as she set the papers aside. She didn't need their written apologies. What mattered now wasn't punishment, it was change. A week later, she received another call, this time from the city's public safety board. They wanted her to help design a new training program, one that focused on accountability, physical discipline, and emotional control. The irony wasn't lost on her, the fighter teaching those who once hid behind uniforms what real restraint meant. At first, she considered declining. She didn't want to be part of their public relations cleanup. But when she looked at Lily, who was slowly rediscovering her laughter and courage, she realized that walking away would mean letting others fill the void with excuses. And she was done with excuses. On the first day of the program, she walked into a room full of recruits, men and women in uniform, some wary, some curious, all silent. There were mats on the floor, training dummies lined up along one wall, and a large banner that read, "Strength with Integrity." Rhonda stood in front of them and let the silence linger before she spoke. "What happened at Lincoln Middle wasn't about a mistake," she said. "It was about forgetting what power means. It's not control over others, it's control over yourself." The first few sessions were tense. Some resisted her methods, others struggled to meet her eyes. But gradually the atmosphere shifted. They began to listen, not because of her fame, but because of the clarity in her conviction. She taught them what she had lived by her entire life: precision, accountability, and discipline. "You can't call yourself protectors," she told them one afternoon, "if you don't know how to stop yourselves from becoming the danger." Outside the classroom, life began to mend itself slowly. Lily returned to school, head held a little higher each day. Some classmates whispered, some stared, but she walked through it with quiet strength. One morning, she asked her teacher if she could give a short talk during assembly. Standing on the small stage, voice trembling but sure, she spoke about dignity and courage. "Sometimes," she said, "people in charge forget they're supposed to protect, but that doesn't mean we stop believing in what's right." When she finished, the applause was hesitant at first, then grew until it filled the hall. Rhonda watched from the back, her chest tight with pride. That night, Lily showed her a new drawing. It was the same fire hose she had sketched before, but now the stream of water didn't knock anyone down. It rose upward, curving into light that shaped itself into wings. "It's not about fear anymore," Lily said quietly. "It's about starting over." Months passed, and the city began to change in small, visible ways. The fire department implemented stricter conduct codes, transparency policies, and community education programs. Reporters eventually moved on to news stories, but the people who had seen the video didn't forget. The phrase "stream of justice" became something of a saying in the city, a reminder that silence enables cruelty and courage can come from anyone, anywhere. On a warm afternoon, Rhonda and Lily walked home from the grocery store, the sun glowing across the pavement. Children played nearby, their laughter unbroken by fear. A fire truck passed slowly down the street, siren silent. The driver glanced toward them and gave a small, respectful nod. It wasn't performative, it was acknowledgement. Rhonda nodded back, the gesture simple but meaningful. At home, they unpacked their bags in quiet rhythm. The house filled again with ordinary sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the clink of dishes, the soft scrape of Lily's pencil against paper. Life had not returned to what it was before. It had become something stronger, steadier, more honest. Later, as the sun began to set, Rhonda stood outside on the porch, watching the light fade into gold. The air smelled faintly of rain and grass, that clean scent of renewal. A thin stream of water trickled down the gutter from someone washing their car nearby, glimmering under the sun. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared into the street drain, a small, quiet reminder that even water, when used with purpose, could cleanse instead of harm. Behind her, Lily's laughter floated through the open door. Rhonda smiled faintly, her gaze still on the horizon. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be. But tonight, at least, it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to watch our next videos. Each one will keep you thinking long after it ends.